Let's learn more about empowering our future leaders. So let's move to our final segment of today's Safe School Rainbow Roundtable. In the Future Outlook, we explore how Safe Schools continues to evolve in creating safe spaces and educational resources for LGBTQ+ youth. In light of the record number of anti-LGBTQ+ legislation across the United States in 2023, our focus on nurturing empathetic future leaders is more critical than ever. These challenging times have not dampened the spirit of LGBTQ+ youth. Instead, they've become more civically engaged. This engagement, however, comes with its set of challenges, including heightened stress and mental health concerns, particularly when political objectives crucial to their daily lives are unmet. Our goal at Safe Schools is not just to encourage civic engagement, but to support the mental and emotional well-being of LGBTQ+ youth in these endeavors. The training of future leaders in empathy and understanding, especially towards those on the margins of society, is pivotal. So panelists, in your view, how can training in empathy and understanding transform the landscape of LGBTQ+ activism? And how can Safe Schools contribute to creating a more inclusive and empathetic society, and in turn, a more perfect union of the United States?
So one thing when it comes to empathy is we absolutely we're all about empathy for the marginalized communities of our brothers and sisters and neighbors, right? I think we also have to learn how to have empathy for people who don't share our values. We've got to be able to understand where they're coming from, or we can't have a conversation with them. Mm-hmm. And I mean, speaking just for me, I often think of empathy as how are you going to feel more the way I feel, as opposed to how can I understand why you have this belief that's not consistent with the values I hold, and how can I sort of meet you there so we can walk together to some new place.
Yeah, and I think it's so important, beyond the empathy is also to start teaching and talking about the values that have made this country an imperfect union, but one that keeps thriving for a more perfect, collective of people. Something that we did with one of our shows is that we talked about our nation's original motto, which is E pluribus unum. It's not in God we trust. That's something that was added, that was finalized in the 1950s to fight communism. But E pluribus unum is out of many, we are one, out of many, one. And that really showcases what makes this country so special is that we have all of these people coming in to make something new, to really create, using theological language, to create a new garden, a new space, a new, even looking at it from a perspective of a new heaven here on earth. Yeah. And we have the capacity to do that. We have the capacity to work together, to mobilize and bring together the minorities that are suffering to become the majority. Because if you look at it, minorities, when you put them together, they do become the majority, and you can bring about immense change if we were all to just act together. We don't have to agree on everything, but we should agree that we have to move together to get, as one in fighting back against the oppression that we see. Mm-hmm. And the oppression is done by the few against the many. So it's important for us to showcase that and to really show American values that make us who we are, and not shy away from that, because we tend to shy away from it because we're like, oh, look what we're doing, look at what's happening in the world. And it's like, yes, that's awful, and that's, it's not good, but we can change it through our democracy. We can actually bring about change by lifting up our voices and coming together.
Yeah. I know Miami can sometimes have a bad rap as a city, but there is a level of pride that I have being from Miami, and I grew up in such an intersectional, diverse, beautiful community, and I think it's so important. And I grew up in Miami, Miami, Florida. Really? Yeah, I went to Coral Reef Senior High School, down in Kendall. I was in Miami. I grew up, with everybody, all walks of life. And so I think it's super important. Something else that we talked about is civic engagement, like volunteering, can look so different to so many things. You talked about going to marches and organizing in that way. But I think it's also important to recognize when we're talking about intersectionality, sometimes one of the kind of aspects that we don't think too often is about disability. And so there are a bunch of queer people that are out there that are also disabled. And so how do we acknowledge and recognize that, yes, marching and protesting, so important as civic engagement. But back to what I said, like, okay, you can't be out marching, make a flyer for me, make a zine for my organization, exactly. Let's go canvassing door to door, like let's go do other things. So there is a place in the movement for everybody. And so I think that's also important to talk about.
Yeah, it definitely is. I wanted to bring it back to the empathy. Self-love is so important. Loving yourself as a human being is so important first, and then American, and you got that one goes after.
Yeah.
I say that just because that's how I learned how to get out of depression. It was really as an activist. It was just love myself. Yeah. So when I got back to the LGBTQ movement in 2021, that's how we changed things. Yeah. But I want to take it back to when I was younger too. So for gender equality, we talked about gender equality to a lot of schools in Hialeah as a GSA.
That was kind of like the starting point, I think, for queer. Way back.
Around 2014 through 2016, we launched an initiative in Hialeah to talk about gender equality. Yeah. So we talked about transgender. Yeah. We talked about the inequalities with women and men and trans people. And we really brought it back to just human value. At the end of our presentations, we always talked about meditation, loving yourself, talking to your families about it, because majority of these gender equality presentations we did with 5th graders. Yeah. Those 5th graders now are voters now in Hialeah.
Absolutely.
Amazing to say that.
And I would kick myself in the butt if we weren't having a conversation about activism and love and self-love and all of these things. If the best resource and recommendation that I can give, if you guys have read All About Love by Bell Hooks, if you haven't, please read it. It's life-changing. Bell Hooks, All About Love. Please read it. I think it ties so perfectly into how we can use leading with love to do social change and do activist work, which is
Pauline Green from the Alliance, All for LGBTQ Kids, they always talk about, she always talks about love.
Yeah.
She mentored me for quite a bit this year, and I was just like, wow. It was a really fresh breath of air, and I think even talking about self-love, it's just so important to just grasp it and be in those circles of self-love and embracing and uplifting.
I think sometimes we get so caught up with like feelings of oppression, and like feeling oppressed leads to then like social justice movement and activism and all these things. But I think if we are moving from a place of love and moving from a place of I love my community and I love everyone so much that I'm doing this social justice work, I think it would help people's mental health because you're reframing how you're kind of engaging with this work in a more positive way.
Well, and you mentioned community in your statement, and I again, we have to go back to the community aspect of what that looks like. Something that I was very looking back now as much 30-year-old, when I was in my 20s, that's when I started no reservations. And what was so beautiful about it is that we had people from every walks of life join the group, and I was so intentional about that. We had someone that had a disability. She was in a wheelchair, and she taught us how to be better and what to say. And if you met her, she's awesome. She's a lawyer, a disabilities lawyer, and she was like in your face about it, but also teaching you about things. So she really taught us the importance of like, oh yeah, like we should be thinking about this too. We should be looking at multiple aspects of our community. And beyond her, there were other people that came into the community too. We had a trans person, and that was honestly my first exposure to the trans community. And I loved that because I realized how I had so many biases that were ingrained in me that I didn't even know that I had until I was actually face to face with a trans person. And what I do as an individual is that I tend to lean towards the things that make me uncomfortable because I want to understand what's making me uncomfortable.
That takes a lot of bravery.
But that's
courage.
Me, yeah. But that's like, and I wish that more people would see it that way. You know, go find a community of people that you just don't know if you're gonna fit in.
Yeah.
And meet them, see them, and if we did that with everybody, if we stop pretending that there's this binary between red, blue, whatever other thing you want to create, and just meet in the center and sit at a table like this, we can make amazing change because we start to see each other as humans and not some, soundbite, not something that is said about us. Instead, we're forced with the realities of who we are as individuals.
Yeah.
And we're talking about empathy, and I think something that's very easy to do in the very tribalistic world of social media today and mass media and all of those type of things is to make assumptions about other people. You know, making assumptions about who this person is, why they think the way that they do, who these people are, why they think the way they do. And we just need to not make assumptions and actually try to form those genuine connections with people, even if they do think differently than us, and show them this is who we are, this is what we stand for, this is what we're about. They just might not have ever seen it that way.
One of the things for me, when I've sat at the table with people who, in my head, I perceived as being on the opposite side of, you know, on very real issues to me. The thing I've always noticed is I have more in common with those people than I have apart, right?
Exactly.
I sit down at a table and realize, wow, 99% of stuff we agree on 100%. And when all of a sudden you come from the place of, wait, we agree on 99%, there's only 1% we don't agree on, it's really easy to make that 1% be less, right? Because you're building on a common bounds you've already found. So I always try to find, like, what is the thing that I have in common with this person who I might have what I think is a feeling of hate towards, right? But it's not really that, right? I just haven't discovered the reasons yet. I love them.
And I think it's so important to talk about the big P word that we tend to shy away from. Yes, it's called privilege.
Yes. We shy around it all the time.
and it's like, and you know, for me as a queer individual, I have the privilege of not presenting queer in many spaces, and that's, you know, I understand that that's a privilege that I have that other people don't have. I want to change it for everybody, but I'm going to use that privilege to talk about and to have, when people don't, you know, when they don't assume or they assume that I'm something that I'm not, I can then enter that space and talk to them and have them get to know me first. And then be like, oh, and by the way, I'm queer and I'm married and this is my life and I'm a pastor. Once that happens, they're like, wait, I can't you, like, I want to hate you, but wait, I like you now. I like your husband. You're a pastor. What? Tell me more about that. And that diffuses people. So use your privilege for good, and then just dismantle the system that gave you privilege to begin with.
I want to piggyback on that because I work at an organization called Safeguarding American Values for Everyone. I am, you know, Catholic, I'm Buddhist, I am everything under the sun, but I don't talk about it. But talking about privilege, I don't see privilege dressing like this usually, and I think this is a part of privilege. I'm wearing a lot of expensive stuff right now, but I look gay apparently. I look gay and I'm like, what does that mean? Is it the haircut? Is it something? Is it my face? I have no idea. I really wanted to bring it to that. I you know, with empathy and just building with civic engagement with Safeguarding American Values for the last 2 years, which I don't work there anymore, but to talk about that, you know, knocking on doors to change hearts and minds. I was able to rebuild South Florida with a lot of volunteers. We were able to recruit over 700 volunteers for these initiatives, and from the ages of 16 through literally 33, I made sure to get millennials with us because we need millennials back. I'm Gen Z. I'm the first year of Gen Z. 96. I'm on the cusp of Zillennial. But I think what's really important when we talk about Gen Z and talk about youth, it's letting them know they always have a seat in the table with empathy, with love and empathy. That's actually how I was able to build and how UM was able to build and still is building. We always look at students with love. And if you can't do something, that's okay. Always reminding them it's okay if you can't commit, because it's not a commitment. We're not in a marriage. We're in a friendship. We're in a relationship together. And let's take care of each other. Like I was saying a little earlier about just building things and setting up stuff together in actions. I made sure my volunteers from the ages of 18 through 20, like Javi's volunteered for Safe too. They were able to set up things and talk and present and just get these soft skills off the bat.
I think the greatest tool that I've been able to get to build empathy, I'm a very avid reader, and I really believe that like literacy leads to liberation, and reading from diverse authors and diverse perspectives, I think, is a great way to build empathy, especially when, you know, you talked about being comfortable leaning into discomfort and uncomfortable conversations and challenging your biases. You know, if you're not there yet as a person, that's okay. Go to your local library, pick up a book, pick up a book about somebody you've never interacted with before, and learn about their lived experience that way until you do feel comfortable to engage in that conversation.
Pick up a banned book and see why. Like, just be curious about why did they ban this book? Like, just be curious about it. And a huge problem that I think that we also have today, and you're talking about, you know, that you're Gen Z and I'm a millennial. There's a problem that we have that is called generational amnesia. That we focus so much on our generation and what we're feeling and what we're doing and what's being done to us, that we forget that this has happened before and this will happen again. So we have to like see each other, form have these cross-generational conversations so that everybody gets out of this amnesia and realize, and the generation that is hurting us can realize that they were once like us, so they need to stop hurting us, and maybe that will mobilize them to change. And younger generations can realize that the old generations were once like them as well. So how can you better talk to them? And the millennials, poor millennials, we're always in the middle of all these little things. Like, but we have the chance now to make a difference. Like we have some agency and some power now that as we become the dominant generation, let's not focus solely on our needs, on the millennial thing, but be like, hey, like
agency could be so confusing though for Gen Z. Talking about building community. Agency, I don't talk about agency actually a lot of the time. Because your Commissioner Chris, I will talk about it. The agency I usually talk about is that we need to vote out anti-LGBTQ people. That's the agency I always talk about, but I don't. The agency, usually when I build up agencies, building community, that if we can't do this on our own, we have to be together to change hearts and minds. So when I hear agency, I want to run away a lot of the time. This is the table, so I love being a part of the table too for that reason. So when we're talking to Gen Z and millennials, especially millennials, the millennials are part of every movement, Obama, every movement, the crises of humanitarian crises coming into this country as immigrants. It's very important to realize that for us as millennials, we're very burnt out. And Gen Z saw that with the millennials, like during COVID-19, where are the millennials? Where are Gen X? And Gen X and the millennials, we're working so hard to build up, and we still are building up. Like I said, we're not forgetting that history. We're standing together. But when we're talking about agency, I think it's really important to encompass it with building community always when we're talking about it. Yeah.
I like that you talk about the intergenerational, because I know we make a lot of jokes about Gen X and boomers and being out of touch, but those are the generations that paved the way to where we are right now. And we wouldn't be at our current state of liberation and progress without those people. And they're a wealth of knowledge. I'm sure anything that you can come up with in this current day as a form of protest or activism, someone else, a person already tried it. So really, like, that history, that shared knowledge is so important. And so back to your point, like, we can't separate ourselves. Like, it's easy to get caught up. It's easy to allow politics to divide us, but we really need to come together and learn from each other, because there are people with so much wisdom, both young and old.
We need to avoid those sort of tribalistic kind of instincts that we have as people, to find the people like us and go against the people that are not us and things like that. And a lot of times people create their ideas, form their opinions just based on their own experiences, and all they need is seeing a different experience to change those opinions. Some of the most amazing work that we do in Sun Service, some of the community trainings that we do, training police officers, training firefighters, training some corporations that you'd be surprised paid us to train them. But then also training parents. We have those sit-down conversations with parents of LGBTQ youth and help them to learn how to better support their child, and give them the tools, give them the resources of how to be better allies to
just have good conversations.
Yeah, exactly.
But as far as Wilton Manors, I mean, for you, Chris and Mario, Wilton Manor sort of has I don't know if stereotype's the right word, but it's an older LGBTQ plus community. But there's so many youth as well, and I'm wondering how intergenerationally the older LGBT adults can help support the queer youth in the city of Wilton Manors.
I think that the one thing that's really exciting is the more senior, I'm becoming one of them now. They're really eager to help, right? Because many of them, as you mentioned, they paved the way, right? They were a part of the marches and the movements that got us the rights we have today, and they are eager to pass what they know on, right? So I think it's about finding ways to connect them more, and just when asked for help, they're going to jump all in and do everything they can with both their time, their financial resources. I mean, they're passionate about seeing this next generation be more successful than they were.
Yeah.
And we've actually hosted some really impactful intergenerational conversations between older members of the LGBTQ community and some of the youth in it as well. And some of those people have acted as adult advisors for our support groups. So they'll come and add to the conversations that we have during our support groups, and just be a part of it in that way.
Yeah. And a crystal ball question for you all. Do you see a future where we won't need safe schools?
No,
never. Because I say no, because safe schools it's more than what we are right now. We're responding to what is right now, but as we said,
it's a community.
All of this has happened before. All of it will happen again, and there's nothing new under the sun. Our society will shift, will grow, we will do great things, but there's always going to be something that's going to challenge. And I feel like, not just Safe Schools, but SunServe and all these other amazing organizations, the Butler Center at UM, we have to continue to push the boundaries. You're talking about the wise generation that exists in Wilton Manors. Yes, I love that they want to get involved. I love that they want to give the time and their finances to the cause. But a lot of times you hear that, I don't like the way you're doing it.
Yeah.
I don't like that you're supporting X, Y, Z. I don't like that you're supporting the trans community. Why is it all about trans? And this is something that we hear, even at Safe Schools. We hear this from our older supporters that they're like, you're focusing too much on one thing, or you can't talk about this because it makes us uncomfortable. And it's like, yes, I understand that it makes you uncomfortable, but first, go inside yourself and see why it makes you uncomfortable, and then B, understand that what younger generations will do, what others will do, will be like what you did, but it will look inherently different because things are changing. It's a different world. The L and the G got their time in the sun, but there's this whole other, symphony of letters that now need to also get their time in the sun. And need to get what the L and the G got. They need it as well.
I always hear it all the time. I'm two-spirited, so I'm a part of the acronym as well. So it really hurt me seeing out of the pandemic that we became more transphobic. Remember in 2015, we were not that transphobic in Miami-Dade County. I talk about Broward and want to talk about Broward more too. But it's sad to hear at Safe Schools, old supporter. I am an old supporter too. That people think that we shouldn't be focusing on this. There's a lot of different things going on.
So it goes to show, we're trying to do this work in the greater world, right, around, say, transphobia, and yet we've got to figure it out in our own community.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Right.
It starts local.
It's a challenge,
we got to work that out
Yep.
amongst us so we can be a model for how that works out among everybody.
Yes.
And it's
Are
work
they
that we
models
definitely need to all be
in
focused on.
Right.
And can't turn away from that.
Right. And the beautiful thing about, again, intersectionality in the queer community is that we represent the entire width of humanity. So if we can figure it out in this queer liberation space, if we can figure it out, then we can give the tools and the resources to all of the other liberation movements that need this and the same tools that as we're trying to figure out.
Yeah. Do I hope one day that we'll get to a world in the crystal ball future where no kid will ever have to feel the need to come out, and it's truly this utopia that we all hope and wish it could be. Even if that future does exist, I still think things like Safe Schools will be around and exist. Yeah. And hopefully, instead of being desperately needed mentorship and resources and being this crazy civic engagement nonprofit, in that kind of world, it just turns into what it should be, community-based and friendship, which is to the core. And celebration, which is what a part of what you currently do. But because of the situation and circumstances now, you have to focus on the advocacy piece.
Right. I think the nature of the work is just always changing. I know it probably changed for y'all around Don't Say Gay. It changed for us around that too, and changed during the restrictions on trans medical care, also changed the way that we have to provide care to youth specifically. So the nature of work is always changing.
But it's still going to happen.
Better or worse.
Yeah. But we're still going to do the work.
Happen,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you all for your contributions today. And it's so evident that supporting the mental health of LGBTQ+ youth in their civic journey is as important as the engagement itself.